Recording in progress.
Good evening to everyone who has joined us today for the second dialogue of Indian Energy Samvad, an initiative of Center for Public Policy Research. CPPR is an independent public policy think tank based in Kochi in the Indian state of Kerala. Our engagement in public policy that began in 2004 has initiated open dialogue, policy changes, and institutional transformation in the areas of international relations and security, livelihood, education, urban reform, health, governance, law, and other related subjects. To know more about what we do, please do visit our website, www.cppr.in, and our social media accounts. I am Manu Maria Francis, Research Associate at CPPR. The topic for today's deliberations is energy transitions and reforms for sustainability. So it's my honor to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Anish Day. Mr. Anish has over 25 years of experience in energy sector consulting. Recently, he is KPMG's global head for power and utilities and national head for energy, natural resources, and chemicals in India. As a renowned power sector expert, Mr. Anish has undertaken pioneering work in sector reform and restructuring, designing sectoral policy and regulatory framework, commercial and financial advisory, PPP, strategic planning, economic analysis, investment frameworks, corporate strategies, turnaround plans, institutional strengthening and capacity building, power markets, energy efficiency, smart grids, and digital. Mr. Day has extensively contributed towards India's power sector reforms. His recommendations became the basis for the formulation of the National Electricity Policy, Tariff Policy, and competitive bidding guidelines for power procurement, etc. He also helped assure the power markets in India and is assisting its ongoing transformation. He has been a member of several government task forces and committees on clean energy. He has also worked with a large number of corporate, strategy, and transformation projects. Also, he has extensively worked in national and international markets, including Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Iran, Southern African Power Pool, Maldives, Turkey, and Afghanistan. We welcome you, Mr. Anish Day, to this dialogue.
Thank you so much.
Our host for today, Ms. Dr. Madhu Pillai, is a project management specialist with more than 36 years of broad-based oil and gas, petrochemical, and power industry experience in operations and project management, with a geographical spread of India, Nigeria, USA, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. He is currently associated with an MNC as advisor, oil and gas projects based out in Saudi Arabia, and is a special advisor for industry and energy at CPPR. Dr. Pillai is an engineer with double post-graduation, Masters in Human Resource Management, and an MBA in International Business and Strategic Management. He also holds a PhD in Strategic Project Management. He is a fellow of leading international organizations like AACE International and International Coast Engineering Council, Institution of Engineers, etc. Dr. Pillai was awarded the O.T. Zimmerman Founders Award by AACE International in 2008 for his contribution to the global coast management professional community. He also serves on the board of International Coast Engineering Council as executive director and is the honorary global ambassador for World Project Management Forum. He is also on the board of the leading Copenhagen-based Danish NGO, Water, Air, and Food Awards, WAFA. He also has served on the International Board of Project Managers Without Borders. We welcome both our guests and look forward to today's dialogue.
Thank you.
A note to the participants who have joined us today. You may type in your questions to our speakers in the chat box on Zoom platform. Those joining from YouTube and Facebook Live, they can comment there. Our team will direct the questions to the speakers. You can follow our live tweets and share your thoughts using the hashtag India Energy Samvad. With this, I hand over the floor to Dr. Madhu Pillai to start the proceedings. Sir, please.
Thank you, Anu. Thank you so very much for your introductory remarks and welcome note. Appreciated that. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone who is with us from different parts of the world at this moment. This is our second dialogue of the India Energy Samvad. Just for the benefit of those who have joined from outside India, Samvad means dialogue. So this is India Energy Dialogue. As I had briefed in the first dialogue, which happened on the 12th of January, the very motivation behind the series is kind of a timely intervention into the energy market, basically by navigating through the very pressing issues at a global level. But going forward, probably in the next 4 or 5 sessions, we will slowly narrow down to an Indian context as well. But by and large, we want to focus on a very smart blend of business, geopolitics, global economics, national policies, and of course, the environment. Why I want to emphasize this is just because we don't want people to be carried away thinking that this is a talk on greener energy or environment. It's much beyond that. These are covered as part of the discussion, but we are trying to have an encompassing, all-inclusive views with every component of this gamut of activities directly or indirectly related to the subject we are in today. Now, the first dialogue was on the transition and the future fuels. And today, we will be talking about the transition and the reforms for the sustainability. Of course, on the energy sector. Now, what I have done is I've compartmentalized today's talk into 4 core areas. And we are blessed with an authority in all 4 areas who commands international respect, reputation, and recognition. Now, each of these areas will be covered, I would think, about 10 to 15 minutes, plus or minus 2 minutes here and there. And we will also briefly touch upon the geopolitical situation in Ukraine and its potential impact on the energy, because since we are discussing the whole energy thing today, I think it's a bit unfair not to touch that thing which is happening around the world as of prime importance. And at the end, we would definitely have a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A for all the participants. Now, coming closer to today's talk. As you all know, KPMG has been a very big name within the Big Four when it comes to consulting and energy policy specialization, globally and at national level in India. And today, we have none other than the global sector head for power and utilities vertical of KPMG with us. As Anu has already welcomed, I just want to add one more welcome to Mr. Anish Day as our guest and expert speaker today. And thank you so very much, Anish, for being with us today. We are extremely excited and honored to have you in this series. Thank you so very much. Now, before we get on to this, appreciate that. And before we get on to today's session, I just want to do a quick recap or kind of a refresher from our first dialogue, which was on 12th of Jan. You know, the feedback I get from the team working in the background is we have some attendees today who attended the first one, and we have some new attendees as well. So for the benefit of all of you today, we thought it's a good idea to just do a quick 2 minutes recap of what we touched in the first dialogue. Predominantly, we touched on the energy transition and the fuels of future. And we had Dr. Cyril Vidashavan, a very renowned international energy policy and geopolitical expert. He is basically from Netherlands, but he operates in the global arena. And what we summed up was, like, energy transition is just a pathway and not the end destination. And we concluded that the end destination is nothing but the overall transformation of the energy. As you all know, fundamentally from the fossil base to the zero carbon mix. And Dr. Cyril, I like that aspect approach. You know, he termed energy transition as an energy revolution, and he gave the reason for that. Because this will become the large part of most of the global economies by the end of 2050, if not earlier. So we all know, and we concluded that the discussions around this transition is a very dynamic process. And it will undergo several phases of changes, and I would say multi-dimensional challenges associated with a very good understanding in the national and an international perspective and the context. And Dr. Sunil also brought up a very interesting, and I really like that thing. I know most of the audience gave some very good feedback about it, like about the European Union's efforts to become the first climate neutral continent. You know, many people do not understand the whole crux behind it. The target of EU is not just a clean environment. It covers affordable energy too. You know, when we hear in today's world, clean environment, clean energy, and making it affordable, you know, it sounds challenging. I think the days and months and years to come would help the whole world and the scientific community and the think tanks to surmount that feeling that it is more than challenging. And we also concluded that the transition, or rather the journey from transition to transformation, would be impossible without rationalism from the society and the people. Take any country. And in fact, I would add, apart when we talk about the transition of energy, I think there should be a transition happening in the mindset of the society and the people. I think that is the only way we can have a meaningfully quick transition of the energy. Probably you can have a meaningful transition with an open-ended time schedule, or you could have just a quick transition. Now, what the world needs is a meaningfully quick transition of energy. That would mean all stakeholders to understand what exactly transition navigates through. And what is our targeted transformation? Otherwise, you know, it could be just like many other brilliant strategies we see around the world, with little to no impact when it is not understood or misunderstood by the people. So this was just a recap about what we touched in the first time. Now, with everyone's permission, I'm moving on to today's dialogue. We call it episode 2 of the India Energy Samvad. As Anu mentioned earlier, today we will be touching on the transition and reforms for sustainability. You know, with the we can see the transitions happening all around the world. Some governments have recognized it and acknowledged it openly. Some haven't. But all the governments finally have to recognize it. Of course, each country's response obviously will depend a lot on, like, the acceptability, I would say the suitability, and most importantly, the economic viability for the new forms of energy. And we all know there is no one model that fits all. That's absolutely fine. So this is a context with which we will move to today's dialogue. As I said, I tried to compartmentalize it to 4 areas. So before I get to the first core area, Anish, can I request you to share some thoughts, generic thoughts about today's the topic? That would be appreciated.
Sure, Madhu. Thank you for inviting me again. It's a pleasure. You know, I think you touched upon the word. It's actually not transition, it's actually transformation. And, you know, we are looking at transformation in this, what we are calling energy transition. We are looking at very large scale transformations. We're looking at transformation of industry, and some of that transformation is not easy to have. I'll explain that a little bit more. We have transformation of government, because government has never acted like this, right? So it is actually completely changing many of the things which government does and how it does, the energy mix and so on and so forth. Okay, the planning paradigms have changed, the regulatory paradigms have to change. So I think that's a massive transformation. And also it's a social transformation because it just doesn't happen just like that. It affects societies. And in fact, beyond societies, it affects the whole environment as such. It changes economic balances, it changes the sum doesn't remain the same. Okay, it's not a zero-sum game. It can sometimes be a negative game also, especially and especially for some affected people, it can be quite a major challenge. I can talk about some of those in the course of the discussion. So when we are looking at such a large transformation which is happening, the question remains is that how do we manage it? How do we enable it? How do we make the needle move? How do we carry people along? And those are difficult questions. I don't even expect that we'll have answers. I certainly don't have answers for all of those. But it's important to debate about them, have a dialogue on those aspects, so that at least we can build awareness, if possible, consensus, and have a clearer roadmap to go towards that. And I say clearer rather than clear, because you can never have a clear roadmap on this. So when we have to look at all those factors and take this ahead, uh, the kind of platforms that you're creating for ideating on this whole series, I think is absolutely timely. And it's not just your series, but we need multiple of those discussions. We are touching a very large number of stakeholders in this, in very large, across various segments of society. Even if you have to take corporate transition, for example, it's not just about having a strategy. It will not be implemented unless the last person on the ground is actually aligned to that and makes that change happen. And that change is going to be very, very dynamic because, as I said, people will be affected. And not only by what they do in terms of cleaning up their own energy portfolio, but by the effects of climate change. So your products, processes, technology, everything has to change very, very quickly. And that is a massive challenge. Done right, for some cases, it can be opportunities also. And there's nothing wrong with that opportunities because that then helps meet the challenge. So I think we are talking of a very large multidimensional problem, and we need to kind of be up to it. So I'm glad for these discussions, and thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Anish. That was a very, very clear and a broad perspective of what we are trying to touch today. Thank you so very much. I'm very sure the entire audience is directly engaged with the topic now. Thank you so very much for that. Now, let me get on to the first core area I call as my first silo or compartment. The structure of energy, or I would say the structure of the energy sector has stayed mostly unchanged for a few decades. When we look at our times from 1990, I would say it has been consistently a market-driven structure. By and large, it remained unchanged, I would say. You would agree with me for the last 3 decades. At least a helicopter view at a macro level will tell you that. Probably at the micro level, things may be probably changing a bit. It's not very visible at a macro level. So I would sum up that the electron flow in the sector is almost unidirectional. So do you foresee change in the coming years for this? If so, how radically do you expect this change to happen in the coming years? Especially, I think, especially with the arrival of the renewable energy. If you can please touch upon this.
Surely. So, in fact, it's not just about 3 decades. If you take a really helicopter view, we say that some sectors change quickly, once a decade, some change in 2-3 decades. The energy sector, as they say, changes once a century. Okay, and this is the time of that change. And if you look back, it is true, because when we went into electricity, then hydrocarbons on a very large scale, that was about a century ago. Okay, and since then, broadly, the sector structures and methods have remained similar or same. There have been some changes since the 1990s, where deregulation has come in and so on and so forth. But these in the context of a whole sector, these are operational changes. Okay, but today what we are seeing is that once in a century change, where we are seeing the whole supply side transformed, the demand side transformed, traditional resources like hydrocarbons actually slowly receding, and renewable energy coming in. So you can say that this is truly an inflection point and that is going to change the whole shape of this sector. Now, let me just elaborate on that a little bit more. On the supply side, what is happening is that we are looking at clean energy coming in, and especially renewables coming in a big way, both in response to climate concerns, but also because the cost points now have come to a point where renewable energy is becoming very, very cost competitive. And that is causing massive change. Now, that change, of course, still, if you say conventional electricity or energy, both power and hydrocarbons continue to dominate in absolute terms. But if you take the trends, then renewable energy is growing very, very quickly, to the point that conventional energy is not seeing the investments which we need to manage the transition. So now we have actually a very critical problem. The energy sector in the world needs investments, whether it's conventional power or conventional energy or renewable energy, it needs investments. Investments have been coming to renewable energy, but it's a very small base, so it has to grow much more quickly. We needed some investments to continue at scale in conventional, coal or hydrocarbons, just to manage this whole process and transition. But that now investors don't want to invest in. And this is also causing a major challenge. So even before Ukraine, the main spike in the post-COVID period, or as we were recovering from COVID, came because demand picked up. There were not enough supplies. Investments were not happening for good, almost like close to a decade, adequately in hydrocarbons or in conventional electricity. And suddenly the prices started spiking up when demand picked up. So European, for example, gas prices have been very, very high. Coal prices have been very high, even before Ukraine. So I think Ukraine is a separate part. We discuss about it and what it does. But even before that, it has been a challenge. The second challenge, apart from investments, is the fact that the characteristics are very different. So in renewable energy, in conventional energy, you largely store the fuel and consume the electricity generator or energy generated once the fuel is converted to energy. You almost consume that instantly. In renewable energy, you are doing the opposite. Okay, you are actually generating that electricity from renewable energy, and then often you have to store. So it's the whole thing is changing. The paradigm is changing because renewable energy, because it's variable and it has to be instantly generated, unlike coal, which you can store, or oil or gas, you can store to a great extent. You cannot store renewable energy, right? So you have to. I mean, I'm leaving hydro out for the moment, storage hydro out for the moment. But wind and solar, you have to pretty much either consume instantly or find some storage. So that changes the dynamic of that. Okay, and the variability of renewable energy, significantly changes that affects the whole energy sector dynamic. So combination of underinvestment in traditional avenues, coupled with variability and the characteristic difference of renewable energy, it is completely changing the dimensions of the electricity industry or energy industry. The third point is also very interesting. In some places, the resources coincide. So you have conventional coal or hydrocarbons can also have renewable energy resources. So, for example, Madhu, where you are in Saudi Arabia, there's both the sun as well as you have the hydrocarbon resources. Now, whether in one for one they will match up, they will not. Okay, but at least you have the possibility of the same source, going into say, hydrogen production, ammonia production, green ammonia production, and then being shipped out. Okay, but in many other parts that will not be possible. Okay, so where you do not have, now even if you look at India, Okay, the renewable energy production is largely in the western and southern parts of the country, whereas conventional production is in the eastern part of the country. So this completely changes the dynamic for society. So these three or four things, investments, technical characteristics, as well as location, causes a major disruption, causes major changes, and which some of which is manifested in high prices. It is, social changes which we are talking about. All of this becomes, dimensions which we have to deal with. So this is where, I say that it is quite unprecedented, and we would mention that it's quite unprecedented and is going to have its effects.
Yes, thank you so much, Anish. Yes, I think as you close, that the word I picked most was it is quite unprecedented. The way things are changing, and especially with the characteristics and the main point, if I captured correctly, the specific characteristics of the renewable energy, that it needs to be instantly consumed or transported because it's more expensive to store it. So in fact, some of these challenges we touched in the first dialogue as well. I'm glad that it's a very beautiful transition of what we discussed in the first episode. And I also recognize and totally agree with your expert view of the underinvestment. And of course, it comes with its own multidimensional challenges. It's easy to say it is underinvestment. The money has to come from other places as well. And it's a very complex equation and dynamics, easier said than done to surmount in a short period of time. Very clear. I think that was a very clear explanation.
I'll add one more dimension to this. Okay.
Yeah, please.
The electricity sector in particular, and even broadly energy sector, used to be top down. So you used to generate, produce, used to transport, and used to consume. And the consumer was actually a consumer. He was not a customer in that sense. But with renewable energy, that can change, and couple it with, say, electric vehicles, where storage can be had in the electric vehicle battery in some form or fashion in future. It can become very interesting. So the consumer becomes a customer. In fact, also a producer sometimes if we have rooftop solar. So it becomes, quite changes the dynamic of the utility sector and changes the flow patterns also, right? So because earlier it was top-down unidirectional flow, now it can become bidirectional flow. Okay, we don't know how this will play out, how rooftop will play out, how distributed generation will play out. It will change the characteristic of the grid. We really cannot predict exactly how it will change, but it will change the characteristic of the grid. Okay, and there are many factors. It's a complex multidimensional challenge, so you can't exactly predict. So as a consequence, now when we look into the future, we have added another level of complexity for good reasons, because we do want customers to be treated with, care, caution, everything which the utility sector has never seen in the past. But then the customers will now demand it, and if they don't get it, then they can do their own thing. So the dynamic also changes from the customer side with renewable energy coming in.
Yeah, that's pretty visible. That's pretty visible. Even at the lowest load, it's very, very visible. I'm very sure the entire audience will agree with that. Good. Thank you. So now, can we move on to the second area now? Now, here, we are now going to touch the technology. If you look at what is happening today, generally in the world, and especially in the energy sector, the information technology and operation technology, IT and OT, are evolving so very quickly, irrespective of the sector of industry or business you are in, or you are talking about. And we can very clearly see IT and OT converging in the energy sector. It's very visible. In fact, when you look at energy globally, the energy sector is one of those areas where the digital transformation is happening every moment. There is an advancement in the concept. Whether it is building up capacities through project, whether it is operation, whether it is distribution, you name it, every aspect of it is undergoing digital transformation in a very high pace. Now, how do you see this IT and OT shaping the energy sector of the future? We can see what is happening today, and sometimes what happens tomorrow is too unpredictable. So how do you see it happens in a kind of a foreseeable future? I don't know if it is reasonable to look at 10 to 20 years span, or it is too long. Please, if you can pick a reasonable time frame and share your thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. So IoT or ITOT is not new to the electricity sector or the energy sector, because we have had SCADA and we have had other technologies for a very long time. Okay. The difference is that now it has become an everyday technology. Earlier, it used to be with some specialists, it was rocket science in that sense, right? But now it has become an everyday technology. Okay. And this is especially OT I'm talking about. Okay. Now, when you combine this with IT, because internet information technology is combining with operational technology, there's so many touch points for that to happen. So when all of that happens, it starts another level of transformation. Now, you add that to the fact that rooftop or distributed energy generation is also coming in. And so the scope of some of those technologies is going down to the last mile. And then with the combination of IoT devices and edge computing coming in, the whole potential of this has become very, very different. Now you can call it a challenge, and it is a challenge. It disrupts the system because you can't necessarily control all of these flows or the information flow. It is a cybersecurity challenge for sure, because your systems become very exposed the moment you have so many touch points into your IoT, ITOT integrated system. But it's also a great opportunity, because then you can have consumers or users actually participate. You can send price signals to them. They can optimize their consumption. They can optimize their production. They optimize their storage of electricity, and so on and so forth. They can bring new use cases to it. There's so many digital technologies which are coming, and honestly, the startup scene is really, really vibrant on that. I keep meeting them, and I am really marvel at the kind of work which is happening by startups in that space. So you start putting all of that, it becomes completely different set of different world over there, a world of innovation which is possible. And that is a great, great thing. The only challenge is that I mentioned that in managing the grid is going to become that much more difficult unless somebody is really planning for it and working on it in a very deliberate manner. Now, especially in India, utilities have been typically slow on that. They have not recognized consumers as customers. Okay, they treated them as consumers, and they have relied on top-down flows. Basically, they provide, somebody else takes it. But now, when they're facing the reverse, and when they're seeing such innovation at scale, which they can become a part of, but they struggle to be, okay, then they see themselves overwhelmed. And this is inevitable. So we will see utilities getting overwhelmed, but the real smart ones amongst them, okay, if they can get a hang of this one, okay, think about new products, new solutions, new business models in the future, then it can become a very different story. Uh, Utilities have something which very few people have. They have access to a consumer's home. And how many people will we let us into our homes? But we do let utilities into our homes, okay? But they have never used that to their advantage or benefit. But if they start doing that, if they start preparing for that, get the right technology and right protections in, of course, but all technology and right products and right services in, then the chance of innovation in today's world, where the consumer is also a much more aware consumer and does his own thing often, the possibilities are huge. I really want our utilities to take advantage of those possibilities, but I'll also recognize that many of them will see as a challenge and try to stop things. You cannot stop the flow of water, right? Beyond the point, the direction of water flow will be what it is. You can try to dam it for a while, but eventually the force will become too much. It'll blow you away. It'll kind of wash you away. So it is best that we recognize the challenges, the possibilities of IT/OT integration, edge computing, all the digital technologies which sit, and try to create new business models which will then transform the sector. And by the way, this will also help the energy transformation, because if you do all of this, you become, your employees, your customers all become a part of this journey. There are so many things you can do. For example, you can send price signals, as I mentioned, for timely consumption. You can send, identify if somebody wants green power, okay, at a particular time. You can have the green markets combined with the consumption profiles and so on and so forth. So it gives you a lot of visibility, lot of control, lot of possibility for innovation. But as I said, my fear is that some of the utilities will be very slow in doing that.
Yeah, that was pretty clear. I think the part I liked most was you have connected that challenge, which is probably related to the potential or the happening disruptions from the IT and OT combination, because some people see that IT OT combination to be pretty deadly and very difficult to be handled and managed. But you have seen the opportunity in it, and the way you have explained the opportunity by making the kind of, now I should use the word customer, because as you rightly picked, the Indian utility sector has never considered their consumer as customer. But I think time has come it is changing. It is changing, as you rightly said, they're forced to change. And they, whether they inform the customer or not, the customer is bound to be much better informed than they were earlier. And that is going to make them demanding things, as you rightly said, using the power at a particular time so that they can manage it, the overall bill on the electricity. And if somebody has got small generation through solar or anything, how he optimizes the whole capacity he has, the little capacity he has against the consumption he has. It's a very complex, it used to be a very complex thing, but I think now an average customer is slowly understanding it. Even you don't need to be an electrical engineer or an MBA to understand the basic dynamic. Because I've seen even in small villages, people have got small solar plants and they start talking about, now I pay only this much and I export this much. People have started using the word export in villages. That is a big change. It's a big change. It's a big change. And I think we are heading towards the best.
If you allow me, I think this is not just about household customers. Under the, say, the Kusum scheme, even farmers will actually export the extra electricity into the grid. Okay, so this is an extra income stream for them as well. And I think it can solve a lot of the problems, because it can solve, say, water overuse problems. When you used to get free power on the grid, okay, electricity to grid electricity, you don't care about groundwater, okay? But when you can export that electricity back, you actually will be using only that much for pumping and export the rest. So some of those things, behavioral changes can be brought about by technology and by bidirectional flows, which I think we need to kind of tap into. So it's a great potential there.
Yeah, great potential. It's a big opportunity, and the whole country or multiple countries have started recognizing it as, see, the opportunity existed. The question was, are the governments and the public, by and large, are understanding and seeing it as an opportunity? Now it's changing and it's moving very, very fast. Thank you so much for that clarification and detail. Now, if you allow me, I will now go to the third area I have. The future's electricity needs to be more efficient, whether it comes to operation or just enhanced productivity, and most importantly, the long-term sustainability. Now, what will be the role of the traditional utility? We just said earlier, the utility sector has to change its mindset, and it's slowly changing. So what would be the role of the traditional utility in the future? I personally feel, the traditional players just can't sustain long purely in their current form. They will sustain, they have to sustain, but they have to change their form. just because we can see new players entering the segment with totally new outlook, and many of them with totally different strategies, with fresh thinking coming from them. Now, with all these new players with probably some wild ideas and disruptive approaches, how they can change the competitive dynamic? They're going to change the competitive dynamics. We all know that. And obviously, the current players have to change their game big time if they want to continue the game. So how should the current utilities change in their game? If you can just share. I know it's a very, very broad thing. If you can please help us to understand a bit more in a simpler way.
Right. So I will use two words, open and innovation, and you can put them together to call this open innovation. Okay. The reality is that with these changes, which I described earlier, and you have also been talking about, Madhu, the opportunity for innovation is just immense. And the dynamic of the sector, the technological changes have made it open, right? And so when the regulator utilities used to serve these customers earlier, consumers earlier, there was one efficient way of doing it, which is generate centrally and then take it through high voltage transmission lines, get it to the distribution system and get it across. That is a very, very straitjacketed way of delivery. Maybe it was right for a certain period of time. Today, it is completely diverse bidirectional flows, I mentioned, where peer-to-peer transfers are technically very, very possible. So you don't even technically need the utility beyond utilizing their wires. So I would say that, I'm not saying that this is carriage and content separation because, people have views on that. All I'm saying is that there are two different functions, and those functions will behave differently, even if you have it in the same utility or you separate them out. The network functions, okay, which will also be complex because of bidirectional flows and others, okay, will still remain something which, you need coordinated action. So maybe you need an utility to manage that. But again, not the old utility. You need a very, very modern utility which will, understand the dynamics of it and build the right kind of assets to serve that requirement and keep the system safe also. Okay, so that is going to be important. And then on the commodity side of things, right, you will have a massive amount of innovation which will happen. And sometimes it will go beyond electricity. You'll create new products, services, solutions, energy efficiency solutions also, not just electricity supply, or maybe combinations of solutions which work for the customers. Finally, you exist, utility exists because, or the suppliers exist because the consumers want them. And they must be served with the best possibilities in the current circumstances. And I can see that happening because I don't see a situation where we will be able to stall this natural move of things enabled by technology. So I would say that the utilities need to plan for this very, very differently. Networks are very, very sophisticated network operation. And on the services side of things, the utilities will be much better off by opening up their services space for others to come and innovate, and if possible, innovate along with them. So you can have a traditional utility coming and innovating along with a new player. Now, it's not easy, say, in government-controlled or government-owned systems, but it still has to be done, finally, because otherwise, if you don't do it, the financial losses you will take, because everybody is innovating on the side, you can't stop it, okay? Your financial losses, your exposure will come so high that finally it will lead to catastrophe. You will end up losing the space which you ought to have over there. So I would say that, on the supply side of things, on the commodity side of things, look at the new age services which you need to bring, with whom you need to bring, what will serve the customer's interest best, where can you bring innovation, and create a completely different framework for serving the market and the customer. It's not easy for utilities to do, but there are other companies across the world which have done or are doing it. And when they don't do it, they get disrupted by the new age players. And just to continue on that See, it's not about electricity, sending electricity into somebody's house. Okay, tomorrow somebody's electric vehicles will be consuming at their house, on the streets, everywhere, and that's one way of consuming electricity. So you will see more and more uses and applications of electricity in homes and industries and mobility, all kinds of things. We are looking at massive electrification of society. So it's a great opportunity, provided you don't lose it. And I think this is something which I think traditional utilities have to understand. Unfortunately, if they don't understand, and I'm not taking a political side in the debate, I'm just saying the realist, being a realist, and saying that if they don't understand, they will perish.
I think, you put it in a bit more polite way. It's something like we say, if the internal changes in any industry, no matter what it is much slower than the pace of the external change, in simple terms, the end is near. It's as simple as that. It's end is near. If your internal changes is much slower than, and you don't see any chance to catch up with the external thing, be it transition, transformation, disruption, you call anything, but whatever it is, you need to catch up with it, go in sync with that to survive. Forgettable flourishing, even to survive. And I think one key thing I picked from your, first of all, thank you so very much for putting the whole, I think my question made it a bit more complex and you simplified the whole thing for anyone's understanding, much more than my own understanding. And thank you so very much for that. See, in fact, the way you connected it with the investment in the right kind of assets. In fact, I want to connect it with the underinvestment we touched probably in the early stage of this talk. So when we say underinvestment, it's equally important that whatever money we have at our disposal, we invest in the right kind of assets. And that is a very important point you made. And you also touched upon utilities have to open up, the traditional utilities have to open up. And I'm very glad that you brought up the point that the utilities, the disruptions in the utility industry does not have to be necessarily brought up by another utility company. It can be brought up by anyone in any space in any part of the world. That is a beautiful point you put across, because the times are gone. You are worried only about your visible competitors of today. Now the times are gone that the disruption can happen from anyone who probably have nothing to do with your sector today. So it's a very important point you brought up. Thank you so very much for that. Now, my next question, interestingly, is related to the disruptions happening in the energy sector. So there is major emphasis on the developments and engagements around the climate challenges and effects. We all need to accept that, whether it is more formalized from COP26 or through the power corridors of different governments in different countries. It's a fact. It's a real fact. Now, blend of these two make the expectation from the governments a bit heavy. So when I say governments, I'm just talking about any government. And we see most of the governments are really struggling to respond to the situation. And interestingly, we can see some governments with pretty strong exchequers as well. Because earlier the concept was, if the exchequer is strong, you should be able to respond to some of these even unprecedented situations faster and smarter. But you don't see that in some situations. Obviously, there are different types of shocks you see in the world around. So what do you think should be the role of the government, when it comes to policy making, the management of this transition? And finally, the key point you touched, the customers, which are the ratepayers for the energy against all these shocks. So I don't know how you can help to summarize these things in a simpler way.
Right. So I think governments have a policy-making role, but they also have an administrative role, and they struggle to kind of find the balance in that. By policy-making, you are automatically looking into the future, but by administration and by the political connotations of it, you are also looking at the current and seeing that how do I keep everybody happy. Again, I'm not finding fault with the government. I'm just governments. just saying that how does the dynamic work out? Okay, so those conflicts are very, very challenging, but they have to be resolved, because I say that they have to be resolved and resolved in favor of the future that is going to come rather than the past legacy that we are going to carry, because the space has become very large. Now look at utilities or energy as a space, and especially electricity with the globalization, with electrification of the world. The whole electricity supply is a massive, large sector. Okay, it's a very large part of the global economy. And electrification is going to become more intense as we go forward, including for climate change responses, because electricity is one of the best ways, electrification is one of the best ways to meet with the climate change challenges. Now, if there you start interfering with the flow of things, okay, and how will you do that? You will either create, let me use the things which happen in India. Either you have a hole in the utility books because you don't want to charge the tariffs, okay, and or you put subsidies which after some time become unsustainable because they become so large, right, and the sector being large, or you put cross subsidies, okay, which actually end up affecting the customers and the industrial customers who can self-generate. And today we were talking about that people find their ways of doing their own thing. So either they will become uncompetitive or they will go out of your system. Okay. And governments have to recognize that all three are untenable situations. You cannot do deficit financing beyond the point for the electricity sector. Okay. You cannot have large holes in the books of those utilities, which they have, but it's not sustainable. After some time, it will become impossible to invest and modernize the sector. Or you will have people leaving, or if not leaving, becoming uncompetitive, which will affect the economy at large. How do we go about it? So this is the bottom line on that you cannot do it. Okay, but how do you go about it? So to that extent, you have to think of the future and how it is going to come. So if not 20 years down, at least think of future which is 10 years down, which is likely. And in some sense, it has already started happening in many parts of the world. Okay. And then say that if that is the likely future for me, which is a customer, as we discussed, a customer-driven, technology-driven future, much more open, much more innovative, then how do I align my sector's policy and sector roles in that? So two things we have to do. One is to really embrace that open innovation culture, okay, into the sector policy, okay, which means freeing up a lot of the regulations, becoming much more light touch in terms of policy, and let innovation happen. But then the agent which is there in between, which is the utility, which is a very important agent, if that comes in the way because it is underinvested in, or wants to protect its legacy model, I think that bondage needs to be broken. And to that extent, governments have struggled across the world, including in India, to recognize that and act on it. But soon the pressure will be so large that it is almost going to be inevitable. The point which you mentioned, that if you become so far away from the reality and you cannot change, then this whole system will collapse. I can't say that governments recognize that. I can't say that political entities recognize that, because we hear things about free power and so on. And I'm not getting into the political debate of that. All I'm saying is that if you have to focus and give certain things to certain people, you have to know your boundaries. Okay, that's number one. And the second thing is that you cannot let it come in the natural flow of times and events, because the moment you start doing that, you make the problem worse for yourself. Okay. How do you go about it? So I don't think I'm saying something which is like implicitly the policymakers and the government doesn't recognize. They do. But how do they go about it? And the biggest thing in all of that is to have consensus and build public opinion saying that this is the change which is coming. Okay. All the actors getting together, be it political parties, be it in a federal structure, states and central getting together and say that, see, if this is the reality, then we have to act in a certain way. Let us do that. Okay. And in doing that, we will protect the vulnerable, because there are vulnerable people who have to be protected. We should make it limited and specific and protect them. And that can be done even in an open innovation based platform. Okay. But the large, subsidization, cross-subsidization, which has come to be the order of the day, has to go away because you cannot sustain it. I'm not taking any go and against political color. You cannot sustain it. You make the whole sector inefficient. You make the operations inefficient. You make innovation not go away. And finally, it starts reflecting in the taxpayers' bill, right? So the money has to be paid. And if you can do it in one, and because of your inefficiency, it goes to 1.5, then that 0.5 extra also has to be paid. Okay, the question is that who pays, the ratepayer or the taxpayer? Okay, or both. Okay, and I think in our aim to protect the mass of ratepayers, we are starting affecting them, and even more affecting the taxpayers, or affecting other sectors which need attention, like health, like agriculture, where again marginalized sectors need protection. We are unable to extend those protections. So I think it is very, very important that we look at it from that perspective, build a dialogue, build consensus as much as possible. It won't be easy, okay? But recognize also the technical changes, technological changes which are happening, the empowerment of consumers, and plan for that next future. And I think that's where policymaking will have a very, very important role, but consensus building will have even more important role.
I think that's very, very smartly put. Very, very smartly put. And as we all know, policy making is many a time much easier than the administration. And we see the struggle we are, irrespective of a state or a country. I'm not just talking about India, beyond India. This is where we see the challenge and the pain and the struggle and the tension. And I also agree with the system has to think beyond the past legacy usage and work towards the future. And that open innovation is a reality. And I think open innovation itself is a reality. It's not just innovation is a reality. Open innovation itself is a reality. And when the whole society is going to be electrified, and if any government keeps thinking of subsidies and other things and deficit financing on the power sector, it's not just going to sustain for forget about decade, even for years. So I think governments are slowly recognizing it. I can see the small change happening in India, which is nowhere near what is needed, as you rightly said, but we can still see some bold moves taken by some government, be state or central government. Hopefully things will improve going forward. And as you rightly said, who pays the price for the inefficiency and the ineffectiveness? You put two categories, but a normal citizen has a feeling that it is ultimately the taxpayer pays about 80% of that inefficiency. That's the general understanding. And I firmly believe that is how it is. Now, I think we have covered the 4 core areas I had. Now, if you're okay, we will just briefly, I know, Anish, you have limitation in opening up yourself fully when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine, being one of the senior most officers of KPMG. But within your limits, whatever you can share as your personal thoughts, we would really appreciate. See, I recognize no one knows the full dimension of what is happening or what is going to continue in Ukraine. We understand that. We also know there is an immediate additional wealth creation by the oil producing countries because of this. We know that, but that is not our discussion point. And we also know it will be interesting to see how the European Union resets the whole equations. Now, one of the key things coming to our mind in CPPR is, see, there is a general feeling that inflation rates are going to be high, mainly because of the sanctions we can see now and are going to continue. Now, why I'm connecting these things is I did come across your article in Deccan Herald, which was it's more of a generic thing, but I did catch some very interesting points in that. And I thought you would be one of the experts who can guide people on how India is going to be impacted. We need to recognize that we are the second largest populous country in the world, and we depend a lot on the import of crude and gas to service and support our population and industry. So what do you see as an immediate short-term challenge? And what, being very close to the policy decisions, the policy corridors of the country, what do you see as some directions towards some long-term strategies? Again, I'm fully recognizing that the picture is nowhere near clear, but if you can throw some light on that, it would be very helpful. I know it's a wake-up call for India to also explore and focus alternate source of energy. I don't know if it's going to be, I should not call it as an opportunity, but we should think seriously about that as well. So if you can please share some high-level thoughts on that, that will be appreciated.
No, I'll do what I can. So, you see, I'm not getting into the geopolitics of the under the war per se. Okay, concerns us as much as I have, and even KPMG has significant concerns about that. I'm going to be more concerned about what happens to people more directly affected, and also more from the energy sector standpoint. Now, given that we are one of the entities at war is one of the major producers of oil and gas, okay, any disruption from that supply automatically affects the global dynamics. Now, as we mentioned, even before this, the dynamics had started playing up where prices had hardened. I mean, you didn't speak of the Ukraine war when you were first speaking of $100 oil. We were talking about that already. Okay, and coming from a position where WTI had gone negative just maybe just over a year ago. Okay, from there we had already made that transition. So we understand how fragile, how that balance is, how tight that balance is at this point of time. The moment you bring this dimension in, where there are challenges to the supply, then there could be embargoes, there could be, I mean, energy is still not covered under that, but eventually there'll be some limitations to all of the trading, because some of those markets are coming up. The financial markets are also under kind of embargoes of various kinds. So inevitably there's a big risk. Okay, and if all of us are hoping that this stops and we get to a point where we have more reasonable actions on either party, on all parties, to kind of bring these things under control and the energy economy to kind of cool down from where it is, it's good for everyone. But I think it is also a wake-up call for countries like India. Okay, now it's not that we had not started embarking on a reforms journey, okay, to bring in more renewable energy, to bring more indigenous resources rather than depending on imported oil. Prime Minister Modi has been making that, stating that ambition of reducing import dependence for a very, very long time. But we have not succeeded in that, okay, because our domestic exploration and production has not kept pace, or even if it, things have changed, it takes time for things to come, and India may not be as prospective as other parts of the world. So there are inherent challenges, but we do have renewable energy, okay, potential, okay, and we can look at alternatives like nuclear, okay, also. So I think there is the widening of the basket has become very necessary, and India has, as I said, embarked on that. But then there have been many operational challenges. Okay, the utilities not buying contracted power, payment defaults, and so on and so forth. I think it is very important to recognize that if this is really the way for India, be it solar, wind, energy storage, nuclear, hydro, then we have to keep those sectors secure, not offering them anything which is out of the way. They should be procured competitively, operated efficiently. But what is the right thing to do contractually, as well as in terms of the actions, including some forward planning and forward actions to secure capacity? This is very important. And our utilities, it comes back to the same point that our utilities are not sophisticated enough. So in any other part of the world, they would plan in advance and secure and contract in advance simply because the cost of not doing so would be prohibitive for them. Okay. Here they don't care. Most of the utilities don't care. Okay. And I think that has to change because now it has become a national interest issue. It's not a utility interest issue or not a matter of whether they care or don't care. It's a national interest issue. It's a national security issue. Without energy security or ensured, we will actually have a major national security issue, especially with 85% of our oil imported and more than 50% of our gas imported. So to that extent, we need sweeping reforms to ensure that we are going even faster towards the clean energy transition. It will be complex. We have to build more networks. We have to build storage. That could be battery storage. That could be pump storage. We might need to do the electric vehicle revolution much more ahead of time. Okay, because that allows you a little more flexibility in terms of storage capacity. Also, if you use it right. We need time of day tariff, we need dynamic tariffs, and so on and so forth. So lots of strategic and operational issues have to come together to really make this energy security play out right. It has not been the focus in the past, as we discussed, and unfortunately for reasons of state ownership. Okay, so if we can really think beyond our noses and start working on it, then we'll keep the country secure. Again, it won't be easy because the characteristics of the resources which you discussed are very different from coal or oil or others. But then it is our survival as a country. And I think the earlier we call it out, the better it is. You also see that India is not necessarily in our neighborhood, we have enough challenges. We don't need to go to Ukraine. Okay. In our neighborhood also, we have enough challenges. So as a consequence, what we have to do is be cognizant of those challenges and be as independent as secure as possible. You cannot be ever 100% independent, 100% secure. Even if you won't even get to 70%. But push it as much as you can so that push comes to shove, we can make that happen. We also need to advance things like energy efficiency. It can give you straight 15, 20, 25% gains as we go forward. And we have not done a bad job in it, but we need to push that ahead. A lot of it is also behavioral. Some of those behaviors get affected by tariffs, but we haven't had tariff reforms. So we need the utility reforms to come in. We need the market reforms to come in. We also need regulatory reforms. And unfortunately, our regulators are creatures of the same system, same old system. Okay, we need to quickly move away from that, actually go towards light-handed regulation. Monitor for sure market abuse. You should not allow market abuse. So it should be a monitor rather than a tight regulation-based process, which we follow now. Let innovation come in. I come back to my innovation point and make the country secure. So this, to me, it might appear theoretical, but it is not. I can assure you there is an alternate pathway, which is not theoretical, but can build on it. It's difficult. It has to build consensus. It requires utility to change. It requires regulations to change. It requires policymakers to think very differently. But it is a very, very tenable pathway, and actually a much better pathway than the pathway which we have traditionally followed. And now, as I said, it's known. It's known. The Prime Minister has made enough and more announcements on these things. But we need to actually create that belief in people and take it to implementation. And that belief will come only when we see change happen. So we need quite a bit of operational changes, radical operational changes to create that belief. But I think if all of this, Ukraine should tell us that this whole controversy, whole challenge should tell us to act faster and bring everybody together to make the change happen.
Thank you, Anish. That was detailed enough. And now I think we are coming to the end of the dialogue. Now we do have good number of questions, and our team has shortlisted few of them. So if you appreciate, I have them on my mobile. I would start from the first one. As time permits, we can continue. Before starting, I have 4 questions shortlisted, so we can, you can manage the time within that. If we do run out of time, it's absolutely fine. We will respond to the people separately. So the first question is from Mr. Abhay Kanwar. His question is, why is there so much emphasis on improving the efficiency of linear forms of energy and not on the circular forms of energy, like recirculating stream in the machines? Did you catch that question correctly?
Well, I don't know whether I've caught the question correctly, but I can talk about in general on circular economy.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Circular economy as a concept, we need to embrace with both hands. And we talk about it in other things. Say, for example, aluminum production. With scrap aluminum, okay, your energy intensity is 1/7 to 1/10 of producing it with virgin material, for aluminum. Okay, and this is true for steel, it's true for others. Okay, so we need to find the ways to really bring them into the circulation back again. Okay, and create organized structures for doing that. So circular economy to me is a massive priority which we need to implement. We have talked about it in concept. Some sectors have it. Aluminum has it because there's so much of payoff also, which is involved in that, but not all sectors have it. And if we do it right, we not only save money, save energy, save the environment, and actually clean up the trash around us, which unfortunately we often live with. So it should become a way of life. And we just need that social change to be driven by financial incentives, which the benefits are obvious. So we need to just make that system work. Again, a lot of it comes from our inefficiencies in our institutional structures. Because, for example, in urban waste, it's urban local bodies who are not the most efficient in doing some of these. They're just managing a day-to-day activity rather than thinking ahead. So we need those things to start coming in. Difficult change, but we must have them.
Thank you. Now, if I may go to the next question, is from Gia. The way solar energy is generated at household level, do you see similar scope for wind and hydro energy to be developed at household level? Definitely not hydro, and shared in the grid, maybe with the aid of techno-mechanical advancements?
Okay. So in a small scale, wind is possible, but the cost benefit doesn't work out at this point of time. So even if you do it, it depends on the where you are. Actually, wind didn't start on these mega scale things. If you look at Europe, the windmill started on a relatively small scale, if not on the rooftop, at least in the compounds of people's houses and farms. But eventually it went on to become large size because the cost efficiencies to become much higher. And I don't think there are small turbines which are possible, but I don't think they have been successful. I'm not an expert on this, but I haven't seen anything which tells me that in the next 10 years, we should be banking on them. Okay, so that's number one. On hydro, it's not possible, of course, at the household level, but in the hill states as well as other places on community levels, you can do small mini grids based on hydro. There could be good local solutions. But today's cost structures as well as the subsidy structures often make that unviable because, if reality is that in a hill state, it will be anywhere 10, 15, 20 rupees to reach out a unit of electricity to them. Maybe, I'm not going into the numbers, but, I'm just giving a range for illustration. But if your cost of hydro production and distribution in that area is 8 rupees, today you will not be able to do it because actual tariff charge is only 2 rupees or 3 rupees. So your technology, which is otherwise viable, doesn't work out. So we need to find an alternate mechanism for doing this. Otherwise, it's a good idea wherever it's technically feasible.
Thank you. And we have another question. I don't have the name. As per some data, India is still at 30% capacity of renewable energy generation. For the common people, how can we all put this data into some perspective?
So, it's not 30%. So our installed capacity of renewables is about, I would say, 100 gigawatts out of. So about 30% in terms of installed capacity, right? So not in generation. Generation would be about 11%, 11, 12%. Okay. So that is how you need to see. And that's where, the challenge comes in that for the remaining electricity, 85 to 90%, 85, 89%. We're still depending on conventional sources. So we cannot wish away conventional sources. It's going to be a transition which we need to work on. But having said that, I think we can accelerate the transition, and that's where household generation through solar rooftops or community generation, mini grids and others becomes quite interesting and actually a viable financial proposition. Eventually, and I'm hoping that utilities will allow that rather than resist it, you can have peer-to-peer transfers also. So if I'm generating on my rooftop and I'm not at home, but you need it at your house, okay, I should be able to transfer that electricity out rather than, shutting it down or selling it to the grid at some very cheap prices. Okay, so peer-to-peer is possible. Technology makes it very easy. Blockchain, you can use blockchain-based systems to do that. So all of that is possible, and the consumer or the user, customer has a big role in that transformation. As I said, these models can all catch up provided we embrace those models and the utilities are open enough to allow them to happen.
Thank you. I think I will very clear answer, and I specifically picked your point about the community level thing, thinking a bit beyond the household thing. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, I have been out of India for quite some time, but is this something practically happening in India? The community getting together and making a bigger size generation, be it wind may not be happening, but be it solar or hydro, is it practically happening?
Yes, it is happening.
Okay.
So there are multiple initiatives which are happening, sometimes supported by various entities who have been enabling that, like the Rockefeller Foundation, but also even Tata Power and others doing mini grid-based systems, and that is quite happening. And it is difficult because don't have this natural scale economies of what you would have in a traditional generation. But eventually it will come. I'm very positive that we are going to see much more progress. And it's real social empowerment, because the moment you have that, it's a community or the local authorities who have the control over there. Local people who are consumers who have the control. You can plan your activities rather than depending on unreliable electricity from the grid. This can become predictable. So to that extent, economic activities can be planned, household schedules can be planned. So it leads to a very different level of empowerment.
Good, that's interesting. Now, if you allow, are you comfortable to take one last question?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is from Anu Francis. Given as a major importer of crude oil, it's a bit connected to the Ukraine thing, but we can answer it outside the Ukraine thing. Given as a major importer of crude oil, issues like war and other geopolitical events affect us very badly. In this background, I would like to know whether a strategic petroleum reserves policies of the government is a right short-term action.
See, strategic petroleum reserves is the right action without a question. Okay, but it cannot sustain long durations of spikes. So we should look at it more from a quantity standpoint in emergencies to manage our security issues, rather than a large means of price arbitrage or protection from high prices. Because if prices continue for $100, say, or plus for, say, 60 days, where are you going to find strategic reserves for 60 days? It's not easy. Even US doesn't have that kind of strategic reserves. So it has commercial reserves, and commercial reserves also operate with certain commercial principles, which do not extend it to months and months. Okay, so I think to that extent, we have to be balanced in our approach. We must have some strategic reserves, and India's strategic reserves possibly need to be built up more than what we have today, given our own implications. But it is less for price arbitrage. You can do price arbitrage as incidental, but the principal reason for doing it is security.
Okay, that's correct. You are absolutely correct. As a person who is very intimately involved in the hydrocarbon sector in the upstream and downstream, I can very well see what you are trying to tell. Like, the short-term action can never be supporting such situations. Even the definition of short is much, much longer than an average person who is not intimately familiar with this field can even imagine. Now, that brings us to the kind of an end of this debate. And thank you so very much, Mr. Anish. Thank you so very much. It was indeed detailed insights put in a very simple way. And that is what I most liked about the whole exchange. I'm not an expert in policy and other things, but you had put it in such a nice and simple way, but without missing any element of important. Thank you so very much, and very nice of you, sir. Thank you so very much. Now I will hand it over to Anu for making the closing remarks and any other announcements she wants to make.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. We have had a very insightful discussion today. Even I'm not an expert in this field, but I could connect with what many of the ideas which you put forth. And it was very interesting to know that it was a very interesting observation that the consumers of hydrocarbons are going to be the customers of renewable energy. Like what we are experiencing is a top-down approach, but it will be getting converted to a bottom-up approach, like with customers being the producers as well. Also that the behavioral changes that can happen once the farmers, like you mentioned about the Kusum scheme, so that can happen once the farmers starting exporting the extra electrical power to the grid, the bi-directional grid system. So to solve problems like groundwater depletion. Also the point about the policy making. So because Mr. Anish sir has rightly pointed out that the policy making and administrative dynamics need to be coordinated. Building consensus from all stakeholders before policies are formulated is something very important. So coming back to some of the first points of the dialogue today, from transition to transformation, a clearer roadmap is required. And the energy sector has not changed for the last 3 decades. And the discussion today definitely showcased the nuances of why the change hasn't taken place, but also that this may be a good opportunity for the transition to come into being. So I understand that the reforms in the renewable energy have to be very quick, and we have to be independent in the energy sector as far as possible in the light of the recent geopolitical events. So with this, I would like to express gratitude from CPPR to Mr. Anish Dey for accepting our invitation and leading the discussion today. And we are also grateful to Dr. Pillai for being a visionary and a mentor for CPPR, especially in this theme, and for anchoring the India Energy Samvad. A heartfelt thanks to all our audience who have joined us from around the world, from different time zones, and who have engaged with this topic by posing questions to the speaker. At CPPR, we look forward to continued engagement with you all on this theme. Please keep a lookout for our social media posts and emails alerting you to our monthly dialogue series on India Energy Samvad and other activities. I would also like to alert our audience on the Zoom platform to fill the feedback form through the link in the chat window. And with this, we would like to close today's event, wishing you all a very good evening and a great week ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.